Who is brave enough to explain in one short, comprehensible, oral paragraph the Christian synthesis? Who would like to take a run at it? Sydney, go.
Yeah, well, yesterday we talked about Aristotle and Plato and how Aristotle has really strong epistemology.
Excuse me a second. Joe, would you pull the door over there? I don't want people that didn't pay for this class to get the benefit of it. They're all lined up out there. You know how it is. Go ahead, Sydney. You're off to a good start, please.
Talked about how Aristotle had really strong epistemology and weaker ontology, and how Plato had really strong ontology, which is world of the forms, and stronger epistemology. Then we discussed how Christianity, as a philosophy, kind of synthesized epistemology and ontology and was exceptionally strong in both areas.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Y'all get that? That should be, hopefully, kind of seared into your brain by now. I want you to understand that, not simply for purposes of this class. If you really grasp that, it gives you a place to work from in terms of your apologetics, especially in the college setting, the academic setting. You don't have to apologize for that. Christian faith has a robust epistemology and an equally strong and powerful ontology. And that's what philosophy has been wrestling with all through the ages. Now, people may not like it, they may fight you, but on the face of it, it's a very cogent way of defending the Christian faith. What happened in the history of the West, of course, after the advent of the Christian faith, is you go into a couple of centuries in which the church is kind of floundering. Second and third centuries, and I don't mean floundering in the sense of in trouble, I just mean floundering that it's an illegal religion, it's being harried from pillar to post. You've got Christian people who are from time to time and place to place being persecuted, sometimes severely, thrown to lions, that kind of thing. But at the same time, the Christian faith is not just laying over and playing dead. It's participating, it's responding, it's trying to defend itself. So this period is sometimes called the period of early apologists. And I know some of you, how many are taking apologetics? Or all of you, or some of you? Not all of you, right? So you probably know that the word apologetics is what? What does that mean literally? The word apologetics means, Ben?
Well, in class we said it means a reasoned defense of the gospel.
All right, that is a definition of it. I'm thinking more just the linguistic sense of it. It's the actual words. Apologos, what does that mean literally? Apologia, apologos. You've had Greek, Ben. What's the basic sense of that? Anybody? Sydney?
Well, it's something like some preposition.
That's some preposition, exactly. And of course this is word or logic. Apa with the genitive. Of course, you remember that, don't you? Apa takes the genitive. Apologia means, Spencer?
Something like from the word?
Exactly, or from logic or from reason. And so an apologetic is a statement from a posture of reason, usually defending against some attack. It's a reasoned defense, therefore, and the definition that Ben gave a minute ago is perfectly good, just so you understand the word itself has that idea. Is the word apologetics ever used in the New Testament? Do we ever find that word apologia in the New Testament? You're shaking your head negatively or don't know?
It's not.
It's not used, okay? Avery has brilliantly, well, I'll say not brilliantly, but bravely, is maybe a better word, taken a position. It may be right, it may be wrong, but he thinks 90% is just persuasive, kind of confidence. Anybody think it's used in the New Testament? Go ahead.
I think it is.
She
I don't
thinks
know
it is.
where, but
Now, as in a contest between Sydney and Avery, who's likely to be right? Let's just. No. But come on, you got to be a man. You know? All right. Well, once again, Sydney is correct. So. And it's used, I believe it's in 1 Peter. I can't give you the address, but it goes something like this. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give to anyone an apologia, a defense for the hope that lies within you. Can anybody give me the reference for that? Josiah? 1 Peter 3? 3:15. Where we have what appears to be an authorization for Christian people to engage in the discipline of apologetics. Be ready to give a defense, to give an apology. Well, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, that's what the Christian faith was all about, was defending. And at the beginning, Christians were accused of some fairly bizarre stuff. I assume you've probably come across this somewhere along the line. A few of the strange things that Christians were accused of. Who knows? What was something Christians were accused of? Trevor?
They were accused of being cannibals.
They were accused of being cannibals, for example. They were accused of what else? What were other accusations? Laura?
incestuous.
Incestuous. They were accused of what else? Ben?
Lighting fires in Rome.
Okay, that's earlier. That's under Nero. He accused them of that. I'm talking about more kind of thematic accusations as to their ongoing religious practice. Halloween, you know. Okay. So anyway, that's a good answer, Ben. It's just, I'm thinking more religious practices that they were accused of. Trevor?
I think they were accused of worshiping multiple gods.
You're close. Actually, it was just almost the opposite of that, though. They were accused of, the Romans worshiped multiple. You're on the right track, though. They were actually accused of what? Just the opposite of that. What would you say?
Not worshiping.
That's very good. Yeah, excellent. They were actually accused of atheism. Never come across that? They were accused of. In fact, oddly enough, Christians in the 2nd century were commonly called atheists. You know, that was one of the terms. If you called someone an atheist in the 2nd century, it was likely you were talking about a Christian. What else? Anybody else know any other accusations that were brought to bear? A couple more. They were accused of insurrection. You know, plotting to overthrow the Roman government. Related to that, they were accused of civil disobedience. And probably some other stuff. But those are the ones we're mainly interested in. Who is the first character in Christian history who holds himself out as a philosopher and plays the role of an apologist on behalf of the Christian faith? Who's the first guy to come along and engage in what you'd call Christian philosophy? And it is, Megan?
I was going to say Augustine.
It is not Augustine. It's a little earlier than Augustine. Augustine absolutely does that, and probably does it as brilliantly as anybody in the first 1,000 years of the church's history. But this guy is earlier, and he is, Krista?
Athanasius.
Athanasius is also later. He's contemporary of the Nicene Creed, but it's somebody earlier than that. That's a good answer. He is an apologist. Earlier would be Ben?
Wasn't it Paul?
Well, yes, but I mean outside the New Testament, okay? All right. And nobody's going to say Jesus. This is not Sunday school this time. So. And it is? Trevor?
I'm just guessing a name here, but St. Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, Thomas Aquinas is much later. He's like 1200s.
Okay, I didn't really know.
Okay, right? Anybody? Laura?
Justin.
Justin. Excellent. Justin is usually called Justin Martyr. Many people think that must have been his last name. However, in the case of Justin, he got that little name the hard way. So, if you catch my drift. So he was actually simply known as Justin. That was the term he went by. And he held himself out as a Christian philosopher. Have you ever studied Justin? Ever come up? I don't know if in apologetics, did you look at him at all? No. Justin was, before he was converted, a philosopher. He was called a peripatetic. What does that mean? What was a peripatetic philosopher? Peripatetic, do you know, Trevor, what a peripatetic was? That's a term you should know, peripatetic. Anybody know it? Learn this word, it'll pop up, you'll see it. It's not a real common word, but it's common enough that in academic circles you should certainly know it. Do you know it?
No.
All right, peripatetic comes from the Greek word peripateo, which means to walk. A peripatetic philosopher was a philosopher who taught as he walked. Was that what you were saying? Why did, no.
I did. I got little roots in there and I got feet.
Okay, good. All right. He got roots in there and he's got feet. I got feet, you got feet. That's great. That's good.
I figured out that.
Okay, that's right. Peripatetic. Who's the first famous peripatetic philosopher in history? The first famous peripatetic is, go ahead, Krista.
Oh, maybe I'm going to regret this. Is it Jesus?
You know, you're half right.
Actually, really?
Yeah, Jesus was peripatetic. He was a rabbi and he did teach. The problem is he was not a philosopher. The first peripatetic philosopher in history famously was Avery.
Was it Socrates?
Well, that's close, awfully close. Socrates, I think, would qualify, but usually we think of Aristotle as the first peripatetic because he was a scientist. Like, you know, Mr. Dijkstra. Mr. Dijkstra's ideal classroom is found where? If he could have his way, where would he teach? Every day of the week, he would teach Kaylee out there. He would like to walk up and down the streets and into the forests and stuff. And why would anyone want to go out there? I don't know. But, you know, he would want to go out there. And he wants to teach while walking. That's peripatetic. That's what Justin did. Before he was a Christian, he just kind of traveled around. And there were people like this. They were almost like sophisticated beggars. They were. They would kind of go around and they would teach, like on the street corner, and then hope you'd give them a little, you know, kind of contribution. Some people hold up signs, you know, we'll work for food. I don't see that one too much anymore. I used to hold up a sign that said, we'll practice law for food, you know. Nobody would write on that one either. But Justin would say, we'll teach you philosophy for food, you know. It's like, that's what he did. And these people actually made a living this way. And he was a well-educated guy and would travel around and do that. And then he was converted. And he tells the whole story of his conversion. It's a great story, and you should read it sometime. But from that point on, he remained a peripatetic philosopher. But now he was doing it as a Christian. And he continued to be a defender of philosophy, but also especially concerned about giving a Christian message to it. And one of the first, well, not one of the first, but one of the things he did was to respond to these charges, and he did it in a little work which is called, by the clever name, Apologia. So Justin's apology is rather practical because he's actually trying to say to the reigning emperor in Rome that these Christians don't deserve this reputation, and they certainly don't deserve to be treated as criminals, which is what's really going on here. And all of the persecution of them is not warranted. And this argument then proceeds systematically to take on each of these. So, anyway, all right, Matthew. Why were Christians accused of cannibalism, and how do you suppose that Justin responded to the accusation?
Well, they were accused of communion, saying that they were eating the body of Christ. And I guess the way you defend that is that explain the doctrine of communion.
Exactly, very good. Christians, you know, it was commonly known that they would get together in little private meetings and eat flesh and drink blood. And the Romans, of course, these Romans are so advanced, so sophisticated, I mean, all they do is go to gladiatorial games and watch people get ripped limb from limb, you know, I mean, so refined in their taste that they were just highly offended at the thought of people getting together and eating flesh and drinking blood. But as Matthew said, of course, Justin could make pretty quick work of that was a sacramental activity. And what's important, if you ever have a chance to read it, if we had more time we would. We're going to read a little bit of writing from this era, but unfortunately we won't have time for Justin. But one of the really interesting things about reading this writing is not so much to see that Justin's responding to a specious claim that Christians are cannibals, but to see exactly what's going on in the church in the middle of the 2nd century. This is still very close, you see, to the apostolic age. We're only about 100 years out from the life of Jesus himself. So it's much closer in time than we are. We're a couple of thousand years out, and it feels like ancient history. Well, for them, it's fairly recent history, you know. And you read this, and you find out a lot about how the church met, what the style of the worship was, how they did communion, and it's really very revealing. I think it's, you know, for any serious Christian, it's a fun read, because it gives you a sense that Christians back in the 2nd century weren't a whole lot different from us. They just were kind of, you know, doing a lot of the same things and thinking the same way. Thank you. Why, Nicole, were Christians accused of incest? Go ahead, Jordan.
It's because they referred to each other as brother and sister.
That's right.
And they took that to literally mean brother and sister.
Yeah, okay. So the incest, if you don't know, and you'd be embarrassed to mention, and I assume you all know, is sexual relationships among siblings, you know, brothers and sisters having inappropriate sexual contact. And Christians, of course, commonly referred to each other as brother and sister, and they would get together for what appeared to be fairly intimate gatherings. They would have what they call love feasts. And that was what Christians called it. They called it, you know, getting together, and they would refer to it as communion, but they called it that. And so the Romans, again, with their hyperactive imagination, sort of went to the worst possible construction of that phrase and decided these people must be having these kind of religious orgies in which they would get together. And by the way, that was not unheard of. Some of the mystery religions did exactly that. In the Dionysian cult, you had a lot of that, where people would just kind of drink themselves into these kind of orgiastic states of mind, and it would be highly sexual and highly perverse and, you know, offensive. And Christians, at least on the face of it, were facing the same accusation, that they were doing things like that. So again, you know, Justin Martyr really responds to that and lays that one to rest. Why were they called atheists? That's a little more intriguing, isn't it? Why do you suppose Christians were called? Sarah, do you have any idea? Why were Christians called atheists in the 2nd century?
Well, they didn't worship all the Roman gods.
Right.
So they would have just said they didn't worship.
That is half the answer. It's very good. And the second half of the answer is, there's one other little aspect of it, Kaylee.
Is it probably because they couldn't see our God?
Yes, that's right. The Romans couldn't imagine worshiping a God you can't see. You know, I mean, why in the world would you worship a God that you couldn't see? And so, because the Christians were kept worshiping this sort of invisible God, and they disclaimed the worship of the Roman gods, They were accused of being atheists. It's a great story about a guy, not Justin, but a guy named Polycarp. I don't know what mother would ever name their kid Polycarp, but it is obvious. I've always said one of the reasons I like to teach is because I like to give ideas to the young ladies about names they might to give someday to their newborn baby boys, when they start having boys. I fully expect to be teaching your children someday. You understand that, don't you? I'm planning on that. But anyway, here's some name ideas. Polycarp. You have a kid? Anybody know the story of Polycarp? Is this a brand new name? Sounds familiar? Heard of him? Anybody? Jordan? Polycarp?
I might be thinking of a different guy. Didn't he get, well, I don't know a lot of people were, but wasn't he killed in the Colosseum? He gave a big speech to the audience. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he insulted them greatly.
Yeah, that's good. It was not the Colosseum. It was a Colosseum. It was a stadium that was in the city of Smyrna. There were, of course, more than these in the ancient world. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna. He was 86 years old. He'd been a long-term leader of the church for many, many years. He was a student, a personal student of the apostle, who? Polycarp was trained as a young man under the apostle, but no, not James, John, in Ephesus. So when John was an older man, in the latter part of the first century, Polycarp was a young man and was actually in his kind of discipleship there program and so on. You know that this whole region, Asia Minor, this map doesn't help us much, right down here, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, all of those are, the churches that are in the same vicinity. And so Polycarp eventually becomes the bishop of the church in Smyrna, meaning he was over the several churches that met. And he was a well-respected guy, but Christianity was an illegal religion. Eventually, at 86 years old, he's arrested. And they brought him into the stadium before the Roman proconsul. And the proconsul had a certain degree of sympathy. He didn't want to burn an 86-year-old guy at the stake. He didn't want to throw him to the lions. It's like, come on, man, work with me here. It's like, you're 86. I'd like to let you skate. You're here, but hey, can't we work out a deal? And the proconsul tries to be as minimal as he can. He wants to give Polycarp the most easy possible test, just so he can get out the back door and he doesn't have to do this thing to an 86-year-old guy. And so he says to him, look, Polycarp, hey man, I'll tell you what, you don't have to curse the name of Christ or something like that. I know you can, but just do this. Just swear by the fortune of Caesar. I mean, come on. How tough can that be? Polycarp says, sorry, no can do. The proconsul tries 2 or 3 others. Polycarp, and by the way, Jordan mentions he gives a wonderful speech along the line, if you ever read the martyrdom of Polycarp. And it's great reading. At one point, the proconsul says to him, hey, Polycarp, tell you what, if you will simply say, away with the atheists, I'll let you go. Because atheists were commonly identified with Christians. Polycarp, standing before the proconsul, looks up in the stands of all these Romans, says, away with the atheists. Proconsul goes, that's not what I meant. and so finally, Polycarp gives this great speech. I hope if I ever face the grand privilege of martyrdom, which is always possible for any of us, I will have the grace to say something half as decent as what Polycarp did. And his speech, I can only reconstruct it roughly, but he says something like this: 86 years I have served him, and he has never done me wrong. How then can I now curse the one who is my God and my King? And that's his closing remarks to the proconsul, after which he's hauled off, tied to the stake and burned, you know. And so anyway, it's a great story. Great stories come out of that period. The point for mentioning it to you right now, however, is simply to highlight that Christians were, among other things, called atheists. That was the force of that. Why were Christians accused of, we'll take these together, insurrection or civil disobedience? What was up with that, Trevor?
It's because they didn't worship the emperor.
Okay, they didn't worship the emperor, and that was certainly an act of insurrection. And then what else? Accompanying that, that's again half correct and very good. What else is going along with it, Kaylee?
The emperor would require people to do stuff that would have been considered sinful to Yahweh, and
Yeah.
so they refused to obey him in that sense.
That's part of the civil disobedience. They couldn't go into the temples and offer these sacrifices. Very good. That's right. There's one other piece of the puzzle here. They didn't worship the emperor. They didn't do the requisite forms of Roman worship, and they also did something else. You may know this. You may not know this. There was a formula that Christians that everybody was required to recite, and the formula was Kaiser Kyrios. Kaiser Kyrios, which simply means what? Anybody know what that means? Kaiser, you know that word from German history, goes back to the Roman word for Caesar. Okay, so Josiah, what would that mean? Kaiser Kyrios, translated into English, would be what?
Is it the wrath of Caesar?
No, good thoughts. Kaiser Kyrios is, you should know this, Ben. Kyrios, the Greek word for, no? Sydney? And Nicole are my Greek scholars from 100 years ago. Do you know? What does it mean?
I would have said Caesar reigns. Or
Okay, very close. Caesar is Lord. Caesar is Lord. The Christians would respond and say emphatically, rather than saying Kaiser Kyrios, they would say Jesus ho Kyrios, right? Which means, of course, Megan, what? What would that mean? Jesus ho Kyrios.
Christ rules.
Of close. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. That was regarded as an act of civil disobedience, of insurrection, of rebellion against the state, and for that, they could be executed. And of course, Justin's response to these is to say, hey, these Christians are your best citizens. So far from being insurrectionists, they're the ones that actually obey the law. They pay their taxes. They drive the speed limit. They are people that you can rely on to be, conform to the standards of Roman decency. The only point where they draw the line is that they're not going to worship you. But they will give you every respect you can imagine because they view that as obedience to their Lord. Christ commands that they honor the Caesar. Christ commands that they pay their taxes. Don't you understand? You're persecuting the wrong people. These people are your best friends in the empire as long as you don't require them to violate conscience, and name you as some kind of God. So Justin does a very effective job of trying to defend Christians from these bogus accusations. But he also gives us a wonderful insight into what's happening in the 2nd century with Christian people. It's really great reading. If we could be a little more leisurely in this class, I would definitely have you read this. We're going to read something else, but we'll have to skip by that. So anyway, Justin Martyr is martyred in about the year 164, something like that. And the next guy I want to highlight, I'm just mentioning these people more or less to give you some name recognition. It's a guy by the name of Irenaeus. Keep in mind, what are we doing here? what we are talking about are Christian apologists. There are other people we could be discussing. We could talk about Ignatius, it is Ignatius of Antioch. We could talk about, Papias. There's other people we could talk about, but I'm talking about apologists, that is Christian philosophers. Justin would really be the first one that would capture our interest. Irenaeus would be the second. Justin, if you want to just put a year on him, we'd say about 160. By the way, the emperor to whom he's addressing himself is a guy by the name of Antoninus. Antoninus called himself Antoninus Pius because he viewed himself as a very pious man. Not in the Christian sense. That was another thing that Justin said to Antoninus. If you're so all-fired pious, why don't you be a little more pious toward these Christians? He sort of played on his name. Irenaeus, we're going to put him about the year 180. You ever come across Irenaeus? Anybody know anything about Irenaeus? Know anything? Was that a flicker of life over there? No. Yes? No. Not enough. Not enough life. Anybody? Who's heard of Irenaeus? Heard of him? Anything beyond that? Stephen? Any thoughts about him? Any memories you can dust off?
I learned about him, but I don't remember.
Where? Where did you learn
I
about
learned
him?
about him not in doctrine, but the pastor from Mr. Dixon.
Mr. Dixon mentioned it? Okay.
I don't remember what it was about.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So a little reinforce what I'm sure Mr. Nixon brilliantly taught you way back when. What year was that? How long ago was that? 3 years?
Yes.
Sophomore year? All right, Irenaeus is again a Christian philosopher. He writes a formidable work. It's really a huge, lengthy tome called Against Heresies. And what he does is go through and really slice up at a fairly subtle level the reigning kind of Greek alternative to the Christian faith at the time known as Gnosticism. And he just gives us voluminous information as to Gnostic beliefs. He goes in, he probably gives us more data about Gnostic beliefs than any other single writer at that time. So we're very, very grateful to have him because we hear a lot about Gnosticism, but we wouldn't know as much about it were it not for Irenaeus. Irenaeus actually went to the school of the Gnostics in Rome, kind of a, underground student. He went in, sat in the classes, just like you're doing. It'd be like, let's say you're a what? Let's say that Avery here is actually a closet Buddhist. And he's come in secretly to spy out what we Christians believe, because then he's going to go back and from his Buddhist point of view going to write a huge critique of the Christian faith, and he wants to come to one of the great thinkers of the Christian faith and hear from that man what they believe. So here he is, of course, in Mr. Gore's classroom. You could have done better, I want you to know, but anyway, that'd be the kind of thing Irenaeus did. He went to the school of the Gnostics, learned from a couple of guys, Valentinus is one of them, a couple of others, and then he writes this huge kind of critique of the Gnostics. So anyway, that's as much as I want you to know about him. Just be aware that he's out there. The other one, who comes a little later, about the same time actually, is Tertullian. We'll also put him about 180. These are 2nd century apologists. That is the title of the lecture, because I failed to mention that. Apologists of the 2nd century. So, there we go. The other one that would be important is Tertullian. Who knows anything about Tertullian? What do you know about him, Laura?
I just remember hearing his name.
That's all? I think we actually covered, I think I covered him a little bit in doctrine. Maybe. All right, Tertullian is famous for giving he's the first guy in church history to use a certain term that's become very, very commonly used in church history for one aspect of theology. He is the guy that gives us, for the first time, as far as we know, in church history, the term. You want to take a yes? No? Don't want to take a yes. All right? Okay, you should know this. He gives us, for the first time, the term Trinity. That's what you said?
Yes, I said.
Avery, you should speak up more, man, you know?
That was just the word that I knew that wasn't in the Bible that all Christians use.
Then you just took a wild guess and that was it. Okay, see? All right, so anyway, you should know this. Tertullian gives us the term Trinity. What does Trinity mean? What does Trinity mean? Avery, this was your stroke of brilliance here. So what is the meaning of the term Trinity? I'm not asking the theological significance like, God and so on. I'm just talking the basic meaning, the sense of the term itself. Trinity. What is it? Communicating.
Well, all I can think of is 3 in 1.
3 in 1, and that's right. And that's both. Both of those are built into that word. Does anybody know how they're built into the word? Anybody? No? Go ahead. Unity. Did y'all know that? Now you do. Unity. 3 in oneness. And Tertullian is the first guy to give us that. And then he tries to work out what it means. We like the term, we didn't like so much the way that he worked out its meaning. So basically what he did, he was a Roman lawyer. Tertullian had been trained in Roman law, and he came up with a distinction between sort of like a person and an alter ego. So that was his approach to it. If Nicole wanted to go out and start, Nicole Incorporated, she could do that. So anyway, Nicole could start, she could go out, she could start a business called Nicole Inc. Nicole Incorporated. And that business would be a person, a fictitious person. But that person, Nicole Inc., could buy and sell, could be sued, could, go bankrupt, all kinds of things. And yet, all of that would be distinct from Nicole herself. So you've got Nicole, and then you've got a separate legal entity that is called Nicole Inc. And she could do that 3 times, and then you'd have 3 different businesses that were all distinct from Nicole, and yet were in a sense inseparably connected to her. That's the way Tertullian conceived of the Trinity. He said you got this one God, and then in a sense this God is showing up in history in 3 different persons, like 3 different corporations. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and so on. The church thought, Tertullian, we like your word. That's a good word. And you're going in the right direction here. One person, or one essence, 3 persons. He used that kind of language. But they felt like he wasn't making enough of an emphasis on the separate personalities and their distinct existence. It was more a kind of modalism in the sense that they objected to. So Tertullian was a great help. He kind of pointed us in the right direction. Well, I'll leave that off. So you should know him for that. That's one point to know him for. Yes?
So was he basically saying that in the Old Testament there was just God, and then in the New Testament it was just Jesus? Like
No.
He changed forms almost?
It wasn't that. There were those saying that. That was a heresy floating around some circles. He was closer to an Orthodox position than that. And he would say, I think he would say that actually these three persons were eternally connected to the one God. But it's just that he didn't quite, it's like this, he wasn't giving enough independent significance to that person. I'm not sure how else to describe it. The church just didn't feel like it quite went far enough. It was somewhere between what you just described and a full Trinitarian theology, kind of halfway in between.